Hi there. I'm attorney Jennifer Laviano. I'm an attorney in Connecticut. I practice special education law and I am a member of SEEK, Special Education Equity for Kids of Connecticut.
And I'm Julie Swanson. I'm a special education advocate and a member of Special Education Equity for Kids of Connecticut, thus SEEK. And welcome to SEEK Speaks.
Hi there. So, we're here today to talk about the summer. It is almost the very end of the school year here in Connecticut, and for many students, they will be receiving extended school year services, which we're going to talk about in a moment, which is summer programming. But you, as a parent, we're here to say, you know what? There's some work that we want you to do over the summer too. And I know that doesn't sound fun. We want to say it's the end of the school year. We know how tired you are. We're tired too. We've been going to IEP meetings. We're sick of them as well. You probably don't want to even look at your child's IEP meeting right now, right? Or think about it, okay? We get it. But we're here to tell you that the summer is a really good time to take a deep breath and actually prepare for next year because you know what? Next year starts now.
Right.
Julie, let's talk
Right.
about it.
Yes, and I always like to say that phrase that everybody knows that the devil is in the details.
Mhm.
And so many times we know my children are out of school, but I was also a parent of a child who had an IEP, and reading them can be tedious and painful. And it's not the most pleasant experience. However, when you really read the IEP page for page
Yeah.
and take a highlighter and highlight all the things you might not understand or you have a question about, or oh my gosh, I never read that before. What does that mean? It's very illuminating. And we
Yes.
want you to actually understand the documentation so that at the beginning of next year, if an issue comes up, you're able to identify it and be ahead of the game.
And I'm going to tell you why this matters, and then we're going to talk about reflecting first about reflecting on the year that just ended, okay? Why does it matter? Many parents don't read all of the IEP. We understand why. It's onerous. There's so much in there and it's overwhelming, okay? We understand that. But there are things that are on that IEP that you may not realize have great consequence. Here's an example. I just had in the last couple of weeks an IEP meeting involving a senior in high school who all evidence shows is not prepared to graduate. Even though that student has earned enough credits to graduate, they have not met their transition goals. They need services beyond this year. On that IEP for years now, it is said that the exit criteria is graduation from high school. The parent never even really noticed that that was the exit criteria. They had always assumed that their child
Yeah,
would receive services beyond high school, but it wasn't documented. So that now is a fight. We're now in the
right,
middle of an argument about this.
right.
So
And you
this
know
is
what?
why it's important.
Yeah, and you know what another one is, and there's so many, but just to illustrate examples, if your child has a paraprofessional, right, and it might just say access to para or one-to-one para support, and then
As
when
needed.
as needed. And
Hmm.
this is where understanding the exact specifics of what that para support is matters. So these are the kinds of details we could list off many, right, Jen?
Many.
But just to give you some examples.
Absolutely.
So
So let's start. Wait, go
let
ahead, Julie.
no, let's reflect.
Okay,
Let's
reflect
talk
on the
about that.
year. This is the part where we want you to just take a deep breath and say, how was this past school year? It's one of the first things I ask people who call our office is tell me how this year has been, because obviously they just called me, so things are not going well if they've picked up the phone to call a lawyer, generally speaking, right? And so tell me about this year. How'd it go? And it can be very tempting, especially if you just lived it, to go through every single detail and go into the weeds, okay? We want you to be the forest, not the trees on this one, okay? Let's think in your gut, how did this year go? Tell me in a sentence. It was a great teacher and she loved her teacher, but it was a terrible year. She hated going. Every day was a slog getting her to school. And generally, I think it was a disaster socially and academically. Or I was getting phone calls every day from the school to pick my child up because of behavior. What are the bullet points? Just a few key takeaways from this year that's important to know.
or that your child may not be making the type of progress
Yeah.
you think that they should be. And that's where you can again take that deep dive into what do the goals actually say. But we're going to talk about documents in our next topic
Yes.
of going over the summer. But let's talk about reflecting on the school year. I want to bring up the idea of extended school year services, Jen.
Hmm.
Um, Many parents are not aware
Yeah.
that if your child has an IEP, the team is legally mandated to consider whether or
Yes.
not your child requires extended school year services, which is very different from summer school, which is a feature of general education for general education
Right.
students. Extended school year is do these IEP goals and objectives, which part of this IEP needs to be extended over the summer to make sure that my child has a free, appropriate public education.
Right.
Many teams don't even ask that question, whether it's
But they're
inadvertently or
required to.
but
Yeah.
they're required to. So if you haven't considered extended school year, it's a little late now, but
Hmm.
you can always make sure that you're prepared for next year. But we wanted to make you aware in reflecting about last year, since we are just talking about the end of the school year and how we prepare over the summer, is there's actually something here in Connecticut called the Extended School Year Topic Brief. And if you're listening to us from a different state, please please check out whether or not your state has a similar type of document. But we are going to include that in the chat.
Oh,
But
great, Julie. Do that. Just put the link right in there.
yeah,
We have found it's a very handy thing for parents to bring with them to their IEP meeting that discusses extended school year. So usually your annual review and or the meeting at the end of the year to plan for the coming school year. It's
right.
helpful. Why, Julie? Because how often are the standards of what is required for summer programming or ESY, and again, different from summer school,
Yeah.
but it takes place over the summer. The misunderstanding is rampant.
Right. And it's typically that you just have to prove that your child will regress. And there are other standards to consider and I'm not going to go over all of them because we're going to include it in the chat, but the nature and severity of your child's disability, which is a non-regression standard. And the student's progress in the areas of learning that are crucial to attaining self-sufficiency and independence from caretakers, which again is non-regression. And there are other ones. So we're going to include
And
that
I
in the
just
chat.
want to note this is the part where being a lawyer can be annoying because I am very picky and about
Yeah.
language. So you don't have to prove that your child will regress. That's not something you don't have the onus to go into that IEP meeting and say, I here have data and evidence that my child will regress. That's not your obligation as a parent. That's for the team to decide. And the school district should have some data on that as well. But as we always say, regardless of who's required to do it, you want to be a helpful member of that team. You're supposed to be an equal partner in this process. And so if you do have data that your child has regressed over breaks, I have clients who regress over the winter break. With a couple of weeks off, or that even transitions after a long weekend can be very hard, and the teachers have told you that you want to bring that up in the meeting. And if you've realized by watching this that your team never discussed it and you've already had your end of the year meeting, and or oh wow, I really think my child requires this service because of the nature and severity of their disability, but nobody asked that question, they only use the regression standard, which is only one standard. You could theoretically now say to your administration, pop them an email, hey, I now am concerned that we never talked about ESY programming at my child's IEP meeting, and I think they need it. Can we either reconvene the meeting or amend the IEP so that we can offer my child extended school year services? You're not necessarily going to get that meeting, and aren't confident that it's going to result in ESY this summer if you do it now, but at least you've documented it.
Yes, excellent. And Jen, do you want to say a quick word about, with your lawyer hat on, why there are different standards, other that it's based on case law,
Case law, yeah.
not so much the IDEA?
Yes. So it's as many aspects of what the law essentially evolves into is the courts interpret the law, and then we are left with the precedent from those courts. Okay, and so this emanates from some litigation that ultimately led to this legal standard for what constitutes eligibility for summer programming, extended school year programming. And that includes the right to a least restrictive environment. We could do an entire day on ESY truly, but there are cases that say that not offering opportunities for students to interact with non-disabled peers over the summer, which I would guess 95% plus of ESY programs I hear about do not include opportunities for interaction with non-disabled peers. They are, in one program, all kids who have IEPs for a certain number of hours, for a certain number of days, for a certain number of weeks over the summer. Many kids really do need that time to interact with non-disabled peers, especially over the summer, because they may not have it during the school year. So don't leave that LRE, least restrictive environment piece to the side.
Jen, let's talk about documents.
Let's talk about documents. So Julie and I say it all the time, if it's not in writing, it didn't happen, right?
That's right.
And that's a shame, but that is the reality I think people are coming to more and more these days in life. And so we want to make sure that you have the documentation that you need to prepare to start looking at that IEP of this over the summer, or those IEPs. And many parents don't get those documents right away. So in Connecticut, we have a system. It's called CT-SEDS. CT-SEDS stands for Connecticut Special Education Data System. I'm going to leave aside my personal feelings about CT-SEDS and how difficult it is to work for everybody. I'm going to leave that aside because it's what we have, and that's where you should be getting your child's IEP. Okay, so you should be having access to a parent portal. Sometimes it gets into your spam folder, so if you haven't gotten your child's IEP or anything from your school district since your IEP meeting from CT-SEDS, try looking in your spam folder. Sometimes it gets in there. But if you haven't gotten your IEP and it's been more than a couple of weeks, it's time to pop an email to your administrator or whoever your case manager is for your child and say, still don't have the IEP. I need my child's IEP. Can you please send it to me?
And Jen, I find that some parents don't even know how to access CT-SEDS. So
Some attorneys don't know how to
yeah.
access
So,
CT-SEDS.
if you haven't been on CT-SEDS and you're not aware about CTs of it, please reach out to your school district and say, please set me up with this. Please give me instructions on how to access it. And another word about CT-SEDS, all of your child's records are not in CT-SEDS.
Right.
Yeah.
They should be, but they're not.
Right. So, and sometimes while you think and the team thinks that something is CT-SEDS, it may be behind a wall that people think you can see it, but you can't.
Or the team can see it, but you can't. That's very
Right.
common.
Right.
School's portal is different than your portal.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
this is please know Seek is on this. We are in regular interface with the state about the ways in which CT-SEDS is not helpful to families and even educators. But know this, you also, separate from CT-SEDS, you have a right under federal law to ask for a copy of your child's records. You have that right under a law called FERPA, which is the education, it's a whole acronym for something, but essentially it's the law that says that your child's educational records are private, but you have a right to see them. And under the IDEA, you have a right to inspect them. So you
Right.
can ask, you can submit a simple document to your administrator and say, I'm asking for a copy of all my child's educational records.
And just so everybody knows what that acronym is, it's Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, right, Jen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, and I like to tell parents for an easy way to look at it. When you go to the doctor and you sign all those forms under HIPAA, it's like the educational version of HIPAA. That's an
Right.
easy way to look at it.
Right.
Yeah. So get
Um,
that documentation so that you make sure you can sit down with it.
Right. And the last word I want to say about CT-SEDS is after you've had an IEP team meeting and the team might say, well, everything's in CT-SEDS, and it might not be. So just remember that you can always pick up the phone and say, hey, what you think is in here is not in here. So please send me X, Y, and Z
Yeah,
or
and I
email.
would follow that up with an email because again, keep it in writing. I'm sorry to say, just because this is a crucial thing when if you're looking for records and you're not getting them, and it's something we have to sometimes keep at to get those records because you may be surprised what's in the records. And if you're having a hard time getting onto CT-SEDS because your child is placed in a private school, this is a feature of CT-SEDS we've had a problem with, where parents are denied access to the system once their child is placed in a private placement. Then that's something that you should be calling again, calling or emailing your administration. I can't access CT-SEDS. It's not, the portal is not available to me. That's happened to a number of our clients over time, unfortunately. But you just want to have that information because you can't know what that document means, let alone prepare for it if you don't even have it.
And the last word I'm going to say on documentation is I know I talked about it in the beginning, but really, as painful as it might be, you don't have to do it in one fell swoop or one sitting, but commit yourself to reading your child's IEP with a highlighter.
If you print
And
it out, not everyone prints them out, so you can
oh,
find
yeah.
whatever system. If you do it on your iPad, whatever works to
Okay.
make sure you
Right.
are. We're old. Julie and I are
I
old.
know we're old fashioned. We're like old school.
Yes, we are.
Okay, let's just say you print it out and
Yeah.
okay, and use the old-fashioned yellow marker or whatever color you choose. But it really, I can't begin to tell you how illuminating that can be because
Hmm.
Jen, we know, that so many parents say to us and other advocates and attorneys, I've never read my child's IEP. Like it overwhelms me. Like it
Yeah.
overwhelms me.
Hmm.
Please don't do that. You
Yeah.
you you have to have an understanding of what your child's IEP is because if you don't, you are putting yourself behind the eight ball, so to speak, right?
Absolutely. So let's move on to our wish list, the parent wish
Yes.
list for this coming year, because again, next year starts now, right? So here's what I want you to realize, and this is a hard thing to grapple with as a parent, and I grapple with it as somebody who represents and advises parents, is what I would call prioritizing what is truly important. It can become attractive, especially when certain team members you feel are not understanding your child and therefore are not making recommendations in keeping with your concerns about your child to argue over everything. It's not a smart strategy, okay? And it's going to exhaust you. And frankly, not everything in that IEP is crucial. Not every single piece of it is going to be a hill that we would tell you to die on, so to speak. It's just not. Is if you walked into that IEP meeting and your number one concern was speech and language services, that's really where you feel your child has not been receiving what they're entitled to, and you walk away with a win. They've given you the speech and language services that you absolutely wanted and have been arguing for a while, and you're very excited about that. And perhaps you also had an argument about whether your child should get an hour a week of occupational therapy or a half an hour a week of occupational therapy. You may really still believe the hour is what's necessary. We're not telling you to abandon that, but give it some thought. I'm going to be working with these people for many years in all likelihood. Is this a hill I want to die on? Is it that important to me when I got the speech that I've been fighting for a long time to also argue over the occupational therapy half hour? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We want you to think about it.
Right. The other thing that I want to say about a parent wish list, and I think it's really important to mention this, is I think at, at, at this time, I don't think as it has ever been before in the last few years that teachers are working harder than they ever have been with lots of demands put on them that years ago teachers didn't have, and they're overwhelmed. And
Hmm.
I really, Jen and I have had this conversation many times that people go into education because they want to help kids. And it's getting harder and harder to sort of sometimes keep up with the demands that a lot of parents have. And
Hmm.
so it's not that you shouldn't have high standards and you shouldn't lower your standards, but really think like Jen talked about what are the issues that are realistic that I should be asking of these teachers as it relates to certainly it needs to be about the IEP, but to not put unrealistic expectations on folks. And so let me give you an example of that. I like to make sure that in many cases you might have regularly scheduled team meetings or a very realistic communication system with your team. But it may not be realistic to have a communication system where a teacher, let's say, is reaching out to you above and beyond what is a reasonable expectation. Right.
Our point is that you should be prioritizing what isn't realistic, not just for your child, but for the team in that, okay? And the law says those goals are supposed to be ambitious. We're supposed to be having high
Yeah.
standards of expectation for
Jen,
outcomes here. We
Jen,
don't want to.
let's talk about the parent wish list.
Okay, so a wish list is essentially what your priorities are for this coming year. Obviously, also long term. What is your priority for your child long term? You should have a sense of those in terms of what you're concerned about. And in some ways, it's related directly to your reflections on the year, right? If the year was not going well for you or for your child, primarily for your child, tell us why And then that should inform what your priorities are for this coming year, right? So if this whole past year was all about your child being removed because of behavior, your priority for this coming year is to make sure your child is not having to be removed because of behavior, right? So how do we address it? That's one example of a parent wish list.
Yeah. And I think we want to make sure that the parent wish list is realistic. Jen, could you speak to that?
Yes. So when parents go into IEP meetings, especially that dreaded annual review, which many parents feel like is the worst day of their year, truly, like they hate it more than anything else. When they walk into that meeting, often they have a number of things that they want to make sure that they leave the room with in terms of their child's IEP. So, as an example, I have many parents who have been arguing for years over speech and language services. This is an area where we have not enough really good speech and language pathologists in our schools. Almost every school is hiring right now speech and language pathologists. I can't tell you how many students have gone periods of time lately without any service in this regard. It's a problem right now, not just in Connecticut, but nationally, a shortage of good school-based speech and language pathologists. And if you've been bringing this up for years and finally you got the 2 hours a week or the 3 hours a week or whatever it is of that speech service you've been arguing over, and you feel really good about that. But you wanted an hour of occupational therapy as well, and they're offering you a half an hour of occupational therapy. I'm not saying that hour is something you should abandon. We're not saying that. We're saying, think about it. Is it as important as the speech to you right now? Is the hour really that important? And here's the other piece that is hard to accept, but a reality we are telling you. If they're resisting you very hard about a service and you finally get it in the IEP, I'm gonna tell you you need to be very vigilant about whether it's gonna really happen because they're telling you they can't do it essentially. They're essentially saying to you when they resist, they either can't do it or they don't want to do it. That can be a bigger problem, and that may be a bigger problem. Okay. And we're not saying just ignore that red flag. That's a problem. But think about it. Do I really want to ask these people to do something they're clearly telling me they can't do? And if so, how is that going to impact my child? And is there a way I can be creative about either arguing that we can do this in a different way that might be more easy for them to implement, or asking the school to maybe support something outside of school for my child, like outside private occupational therapy, if they simply can't do it in the building? We're just asking you to give a hard look at what is your top priority here, and is it worth fighting over?
Right. And I do want to just do a shout out to all the teachers and people who are working in schools with our children who we believe Jen and I have had this conversation many times, and as with other advocates, and special education attorneys and people who are like Jen and I, who are supporting families, securing appropriate services, that people go into education because they want to help kids, right?
I believe
But
most people do, yes.
yeah, but teachers are under a lot of um, demands. And it's harder and harder, right, to do this job, right? And so to always just keep that in mind when you are speaking to your teams about what your wish list is. That's not saying that you shouldn't hold the bar high, but
Yeah.
it's something to keep in mind because there's really hardworking folks out there who are, under pressures that you may not see in your position as a parent. And
I remind a lot of parents that very frequently the people around the table who are working with your child aren't the decision makers. They're supposed to be. They're
yeah,
supposed to be the decision makers in that IEP meeting, but the decision maker is usually the administrator. And so we see it all the time.
yeah.
Teachers who really they'd love to give your child another hour of speech, but they just simply have been told you don't have the time and we're not going to authorize that. That's reality.
You just have
So
to,
you
right.
need to make sure that you're asking for the things that you think are essential for your child to make meaningful progress in their program and picking your battles. It's just that simple. That's a life lesson, not just a special education
Right.
lesson.
So our last topic
Yes.
for next year starts now is setting your child up for success.
Yes. So transitions are hard for almost everybody, but they are particularly hard for students with disabilities in general. There are some students for whom it's not hard, but I think we would all agree that transition's tough for a lot of kids who have IEPs. And so there are some things you can be doing now over the summer as a parent to make sure that you're setting your child up for success. What are those things in addition to really looking at that IEP? They are things like is there an opportunity for your child to meet their primary teacher before the school year? Is that an opportunity? Maybe even it's only a couple days before the school year when the teachers go back early, but that's a question you could certainly ask. Can my child come in early to meet their teacher or their one-to-one paraprofessional if there is one, or their case manager or some other adults in the building, the school psychologist or the guidance counselor, social worker? It's important that all children have trusted adults in the school building, right? And so for children who are particularly in need for whatever reason, they may need a very, very specific example of this is the person you go to, and let's go meet them. This is where their office is, especially if your child's transitioning into a new building.
Right. And, to follow up on that, Jen, the other thing I always like to say is that, eventually we want our students with disabilities when it's age appropriate, when it's developmentally appropriate, and you know your child best, to understand what their disability is, even if you don't call it out by its name, but to understand, what they're really great at and what are some of the things that might be harder for them. And that at some point they're aware of what their IEP is, and or for that matter, their 504 plan, right? We really haven't talked about
Right,
504,
right.
Section 504, where you receive accommodations. But if your child is in a position where it's age appropriate, and it is developmentally appropriate, and they
Mhm.
have an understanding of that they are receiving help at school. Um, it is not a bad idea to, over the summer, you could talk with your child about, well, this is what your plan is going to be for next year, right? And have them understand it on the level that as a parent you think they can understand it, right? We're
Right.
not giving specific advice because
Mhm.
there's the gap, there's a whole spectrum of how your
Mhm.
child might understand this process. But I think it's also an opportunity for if again, like I said, if it's appropriate, for your student, your child, to be aware of what their plan is, right?
Absolutely. And in some cases, as a student gets older and further along in their education, the IEP actually will reflect the involvement of the student, and it
Right,
should. So, because what happens after school, after
right,
you finish this system,
right.
or is that the onus will be on your child to ask for accommodations in life based on their disability.
Right.
So,
And let's just
they need to learn how to do that.
Right. And just for those people who may not be aware of that, what Jen's referring to is there's something called transition. And if a student has an IEP, they are well, federally, by the time they are 16, the IEP needs to reflect transition planning. Here in Connecticut, it's 14.
Hmm.
And so that's what Jen is talking about, where it's mandated at that age that your child is actually involved in the plan.
Yes.
And so that we can set your child up for success in the future, that they become adults who can be employed and
Right.
go
Or
on to post
post-secondary education if that's what's appropriate. Are you
or yeah,
prepared
or
for that?
training. And
Yep.
if in fact you meet the criteria that they have the skills they need to live independently.
I
So
call that capital T transition. It's different kind of transition than
yes,
transitioning within the building or to different buildings. It's
yes.
adulthood, transitioning into adulthood. That's what we're
Transition to
talking
adulthood.
about.
That's what Jen was talking about.
Yeah.
So, Jen, we didn't want to make this a really long discussion because we know you're heading into the summer, and the last thing, like Jen said in the beginning, is that you actually want to think about this stuff. But we are imploring you to put your child's IEP on your summer reading list.
And you don't have
Sandwich
to
it.
do it every day, Julie.
No.
One of the things we really want to stress here is we're big believers that parents have to take care of themselves before they can take care of their
Yeah.
children, especially if you have a
Yeah.
child who has significant needs. Okay,
Yeah.
the adage that exists about you put your oxygen mask on first, and then your child's. I remember the first time I heard that as a child, and I thought, really, my mom's going to save herself first? But she couldn't save me if she couldn't save herself first,
Yeah.
right? You can't help your child if you don't help yourself. So maybe you set aside an hour in the morning, one day a week, while everyone's still asleep with a coffee to go through the IEP, or you take 2 days that you're really going to just immerse yourself in it. Whatever works for you, so you can also get some time to relax, so you can take care of you.
Yeah. And if you're a reader, just sandwich it right in between two of the books you have
Your
planned for
beach
the
read.
your
Yes. And then the IEP eligibility category. It sounds just like I want to do it now. We know it's not fun, but trust us, you actually will learn things you didn't realize were in your child's IEP, and you need to know what's in there.
And on that note, we hope you all have a lovely summer.
Take care.